The training grounds of the Kethrin Imperial Palace were a masterpiece of architectural excess. Crystalline pillars rose 30 meters into the air, refracting the light of the system's blue sun into cascading rainbows across the polished stone floor. Energy barriers hummed at the edges of the vast space, containing the exhibition area while allowing the assembled courtiers and warriors a perfect view of the proceedings. Everything about it screamed wealth, power, and the casual confidence of a civilization that had ruled this sector for 10,000 years. Commander Jackson Vale stood at the edge of the exhibition grounds and felt completely out of place. His tactical armor was a study in practical brutality compared to the elegant equipment surrounding him. Reinforced plates in matte gray, ablative panels designed to absorb energy weapons fire. Kinetic redistributors that made him look bulkier than he actually was. The helmet completely obscured his face behind a polarized visor. Next to the Kethrin warriors in their form-fitting energy shields and bioenhanced exoskeletons, he looked like a relic from a more primitive age. Which was, he suspected, exactly what they thought of him. The exhibition will commence with demonstrations from the Kethrin Royal Guard, announced the Master of Ceremonies, a tall Kethrin male whose voice carried effortlessly across the grounds. Followed by our honored guests from the Zoreth Collective, the Pelmaran Trade Alliance, and, a slight pause, the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Jackson caught the hesitation, the barely concealed condescension. He'd been catching it for the 3 months he'd been stationed here. Humans were the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, the latest arrivals to galactic civilization, and most of the established powers treated them accordingly. Polite tolerance mixed with thinly veiled superiority. He could live with that. He dealt with worse. The Royal Guard began their demonstration, and Jackson had to admit it was impressive. They moved like liquid mercury, their energy shields flickering in coordinated patterns as they executed complex combat maneuvers. Blades of compressed plasma extended from their forearm units, clashing in carefully choreographed duels that sent sparks cascading across the arena floor. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. From the royal viewing platform he heard laughter, high, clear, and distinctly amused. Princess Saralyn Keth sat among the other royals, but even from this distance she stood out. While the others maintained formal postures befitting their station, she lounged in her seat with casual irreverence, her long legs draped over one armrest. Her silver hair, a mark of the royal bloodline, cascaded over her shoulders, and her dark eyes tracked the warriors with the kind of analytical attention that suggested she could probably execute every move they were demonstrating. She was beautiful, sharp-witted, and from what Jackson had observed over the past months, completely uninterested in diplomatic niceties. "Look at that one," her voice carried across the grounds, amplified by the acoustic design of the space. She was pointing at Jackson. "The human in all that metal. Does his species not have energy shielding, or do they simply prefer to dress like antique war machines?" More laughter from the assembled courtiers. Jackson kept his expression neutral behind his visor. This wasn't the first time she'd made comments about human technology, and it probably wouldn't be the last. The demonstrations continued. The Zorath representative, a being that looked like an ambulatory crystal formation, demonstrated its ability to manipulate gravitational fields with precision that bordered on artistry. The Pelmaran envoy showcased bioweapons that grew and adapted in real time to different combat scenarios. Then it was Jackson's turn. He stepped into the exhibition circle and felt every eye in the palace turn toward him. The sudden weight of attention was palpable and not particularly friendly. "And now," the Master of Ceremonies announced with barely concealed amusement, "Commander Jackson Vale of the Terran Diplomatic Corps will demonstrate human combat techniques." Jackson had prepared a simple demonstration. Nothing flashy, just practical marksmanship with his sidearm and some basic defensive maneuvers. The kind of thing that wouldn't embarrass the human embassy but wouldn't try to compete with the spectacular displays that had preceded him. He drew his weapon, a conventional kinetic firearm that probably looked laughably primitive to the assembled aliens, and moved through his routine with methodical precision. Target acquisition, fire, reposition, suppressive patterns. It was efficient, controlled, professional. It was also, he realized from the muted response, boring as hell compared to plasma blades and gravity manipulation. The applause when he finished was polite but unenthusiastic. He holstered his weapon and moved back to his position at the edge of the grounds, ready to fade into the background for the rest of the event. Fascinating, Princess Saralyn's voice rang out again, dripping with amusement. The human shoots metal pellets from a tube. How? Charmingly historical. Tell me, Commander, does all that armor at least make you feel safer, since your weapons are so limited? The courtiers laughed again, louder this time. Jackson said nothing, keeping his posture neutral. Engaging would only make things worse. Perhaps his species is simply more fragile, another voice chimed in, one of the Kethrin nobles Jackson didn't recognize. They need all that protection because they can't enhance their bodies like civilized species. Or perhaps, the princess added, her tone playful but with an edge to it, they're just afraid. All that metal must be comforting when you know you can't actually fight. Jackson's jaw tightened behind his helmet, but he remained silent. 3 more hours of this exhibition. He could manage 3 more hours. The demonstrations concluded, and the crowd began to disperse toward the reception hall where refreshments were being served. Jackson started to follow at a respectful distance, planning to make a brief appearance before returning to the embassy. Commander Vale. He turned to find Princess Saralyn approaching, trailed by a small entourage of courtiers who looked eager to see what would happen next. Up close, she was even more striking, tall for a Kethrin female, moving with the kind of predatory grace that came from extensive combat training. Her eyes sparkled with mischief and something else he couldn't quite identify. Your Highness. He offered the appropriate bow, shallow enough to show respect without subservience. I've been curious about something, she said, circling him slowly like a hunter examining prey. One elegant finger reached out and tapped against his chest plate, producing a dull metallic sound. Why do humans insist on wearing this much armor? The weight alone must slow you down considerably. It serves its purpose, Your Highness. Which is? She completed her circle, standing directly in front of him now. Protection from what exactly? You're on Kethrin Prime, one of the most secure worlds in the sector. Are you expecting an attack in the palace gardens? The courtiers tittered. Jackson kept his tone even. Standard protocol, Your Highness. We maintain our equipment regardless of the perceived threat level. How very thorough. She tapped his helmet. And this, does it at least have interesting features, or is it just more metal? Communication systems, tactical displays, environmental filtration. All very practical, I'm sure. Her smile sharpened. But you know what I think, Commander? I think all this armor is because your species hasn't figured out how to actually make yourselves stronger. You're hiding weakness behind plates and protocols. The words stung more than Jackson wanted to admit, but he kept his voice neutral. Everyone has their own approach to combat, Your Highness. Indeed they do. She gestured toward the training grounds. Tell me, would you consider a friendly sparring match? Nothing serious, just a chance to see what you can actually do without all that. She waved dismissively at his armor. Protection. I'm a diplomatic attaché, Your Highness, not an exhibition fighter. Oh, I see. Her smile turned mocking. The armor isn't enough. You need protocol to hide behind too. How very disappointing. I was hoping humans might at least be interesting, but it seems you're just as timid as you look. The courtiers laughed openly now, and Jackson felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd spent 3 months being patient, being diplomatic, swallowing his pride for the sake of human-Kethrin relations. And he'd keep doing it because that was his job. But he was also tired. Tired of the mockery, tired of being treated like a curiosity, tired of pretending that words didn't land. Your Highness, he said quietly, If you truly wish to see what I am without the armor, I'm happy to oblige. Sarah Lynn's eyes lit up with triumph. Excellent, finally some. Jackson reached up and disengaged his helmet seals. The hiss of equalizing pressure was loud in the sudden silence. He removed the helmet and set it carefully on the ground beside him, revealing his face for the first time since the exhibition began. The princess's expression shifted slightly, surprise maybe, at seeing his features clearly. He was younger than his voice suggested, with dark hair and eyes that had seen things she probably couldn't imagine. Scars traced across his left cheek and down his neck, disappearing beneath his armor collar. He continued methodically removing armor plates, chest piece, shoulder guards, arm sections. Each piece was set down with care, arranged in neat order. The integrated systems powered down with soft electronic chirps. Sarah Lynn watched with growing satisfaction, already imagining the sparring match, already planning her moves. The human would be humiliated, would learn his place, and she'd have an amusing story to tell at the next court gathering. Jackson removed the last piece, his leg guards, and stood in the simple black undersuit that covered his body from neck to wrists to ankles. Without the armor's bulk, he was leaner than expected, all functional muscle and efficient movement. He looked at his arranged armor for a moment, something unreadable crossing his face. Then he turned toward the palace exit. "Commander." Princess Sarah Lynn's voice carried confusion and irritation. "Where are you going?" Jackson paused at the archway leading out of the training grounds. When he turned back, his expression was calm, almost gentle. It made the princess's mockery suddenly feel hollow. "You asked me to remove the armor, Your Highness. I've complied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should return to the embassy." "But the sparring match." "I decline, Your Highness, respectfully." Sarah Lynn's face flushed, a silver tint spreading across her cheeks that indicated anger in her species. "You removed all that armor for nothing. This is ridiculous. Are you really so afraid?" "I'm not afraid, Your Highness." His voice was quiet but carried clearly across the grounds. "But I wear that armor for a reason, and it isn't the one you think." Despite herself, Sarah Lynn found she wanted to know. "Then enlighten me, Commander. Why does a human need so much protection?" Jackson looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something that made her chest tighten uncomfortably. Not anger, not hurt, just a kind of weary understanding. "I don't wear armor to protect myself, Your Highness. I wear it to protect everyone around me." The training grounds had gone completely silent. "Humans don't have energy shields or bioenhancements," Jackson continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the space. "What we have are kinetic weapons, explosive ordnance, and a tendency to operate in close proximity to civilians, allies, and noncombatants. That armor," he gestured to the carefully arranged pieces, "contains blast suppression systems, radiation shielding, and kinetic redistributors. It's designed to contain and minimize collateral damage in combat situations." He took a step toward the princess, and she found herself stepping back instinctively. Not because he was threatening, but because the intensity in his eyes demanded space. "We wear armor because we're responsible for what our weapons can do to the people around us. Because we've learned, painfully, that strength without control is just destruction. Because the strongest warriors aren't the ones who can do the most damage, they're the ones who choose not to." Princess Sarah Lynn felt her mouth go dry. "You challenged me to remove the armor," Jackson said quietly. "I complied. But without it, I'm not safe to spar with in an exhibition setting. I won't risk harming you or anyone else here for the sake of entertainment or proving a point." He offered a slight bow. "Thank you for your hospitality, Your Highness. I'll see myself out." He turned and walked toward the exit, his movements careful and controlled, like someone carrying something fragile. The assembled courtiers parted before him, suddenly uncertain, their earlier mockery turned to confused silence. Princess Sarah Lynn stood frozen, watching him go, her clever remarks dying unspoken. Around her, the courtiers wouldn't meet her eyes. She just humiliated herself, she realized, by revealing how completely she'd misunderstood the human standing before her. Commander Jackson Vale disappeared through the archway, leaving his armor behind like a discarded shell. And for the first time in her life, Princess Sarah Lynn Keth felt ashamed of her own wit. The next 2 days passed in a blur of royal functions and diplomatic meetings that Sarah Lynn attended with only half her attention. The other half was occupied with replaying that moment in the training grounds, examining it from every angle, trying to understand the tight knot of discomfort that had settled in her chest and refused to leave. She'd been cruel, not playfully provocative, not charmingly irreverent, just cruel. The realization sat poorly with her. "Sarah Lynn, Your Highness seems distracted," her brother Terrelson observed during the 3rd diplomatic reception she'd attended that week. He was older by 6 years and far more suited to the political machinations of court life than she'd ever been. "Dare I ask what's captured your notoriously difficult attention?" "Nothing," Sarah Lynn replied, watching the various dignitaries mingle. "Everything I don't know." "Helpful, clear, very unlike you." Terrelson followed her gaze across the room. "Does this sudden introspection have anything to do with the human commander who walked out of your exhibition 2 days ago?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I heard about what happened," her brother continued quietly. "The whole palace heard about it. You've been the subject of considerable gossip. Some find it amusing that you finally met someone who wouldn't play your games. Others think you went too far. And you?" "I think," Terrelson said carefully, "that you might benefit from learning more about the human before deciding he wasn't worth your respect." "I'm not," Sarah Lynn started, then stopped. She was interested, that was the problem. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Jackson had looked at her, not with anger or wounded pride, but with something that felt uncomfortably like pity. "What do you know about him?" "More than you, apparently." Terrelson gestured toward a side chamber. "Come with me, there's something you should see." The palace archives were normally reserved for scholars and historians, but Terrelson had access to most restricted areas by virtue of being crown prince. He led Sarah Lynn to a private terminal and pulled up a file with the Terran diplomatic corps seal. "Commander Jackson Vale," Terrelson read. "Age 32 standard years, decorated combat veteran. 3 major campaigns including—" He paused, his expression shifting, "including the Frontier Wars." Sarah Lynn went still. She'd heard of the Frontier Wars. Everyone had. The Kethran Empire had provided intelligence support to the human colonies during those conflicts, watching with clinical interest as the newest spacefaring species faced its first major military challenge. "He was there?" she asked quietly. "He wasn't just there. He commanded the defensive line at New Providence Station." Terrelson pulled up tactical reports, casualty lists, commendations. 80,000 civilians trapped behind their position. The enemy forces outnumbered them 5-1. Standard military doctrine would have been to evacuate the military personnel and cede the territory. But they didn't. They held for 6 months. The enemy threw everything at that line: kinetic strikes, biological weapons, sustained orbital bombardment. The human forces had no shields, no bioenhancement, just armor and weapons, and, he tapped the screen, an absolute refusal to let the enemy through. By the time reinforcements arrived, Vale's unit had taken 73% casualties. Sarah Lynn felt sick. How many survived? Of his original company, 12, including Vale, Terrelson met her eyes. "That armor you mocked." He was wearing a version of it at New Providence. It saved his life 3 times when his position took direct hits. It also prevented shrapnel from his explosive charges from killing the civilian sheltering in the station behind him. Gods, there's more. Terrelson scrolled through commendations, after-action reports, testimonials from survivors. He received the Terran Star, the highest military honor humans award, for holding that line. He was offered command positions, political appointments, everything their society could give him. He turned it all down and requested diplomatic service instead. Why? According to his personnel file, He said he'd done enough fighting for one lifetime. Terrelson closed the file. The human you mocked as weak or afraid has more combat experience than half our royal guard combined, and he chose to walk away from it. That's not cowardice, sister. That's something else entirely. Sarah Lynn stared at the blank screen, her mind reeling. She thought of Jackson's scars, the weariness in his eyes, the careful way he'd moved when removing his armor. Like someone who knew exactly how much damage his body could do and had learned to keep it contained. "I need to apologize," she said finally. "You do," Terrelson agreed. "The question is whether he'll accept it." The Terran embassy was a modest building by Kethran standards, located in the diplomatic quarter, but maintaining a distinctly human aesthetic. Angular lines, functional design, everything built for purpose rather than display. Sarah Lynn stood outside for 10 minutes before working up the courage to enter. The human receptionist, a young woman with auburn hair and sharp eyes, looked up as Sarah Lynn approached. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something that might have been disapproval quickly masked by professionalism. "Your Highness, how may I assist you? I need to speak with Commander Vale. The commander is currently off duty. Perhaps you could schedule an appointment." "Please." Sarah Lynn cut off her own royal authority, letting genuine regret color her voice. "I need to apologize to him. I owe him that much." The receptionist studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward a side corridor. "He's in the training facility, third door on the left. But Your Highness, if you're here to mock him again, I'd suggest you leave now." "I'm not," Sarah Lynn said quietly. "I promise." The training facility was small but well-equipped, designed for a single person to maintain combat readiness. Jackson was there, moving through a combat form that was all efficiency and controlled power. He was wearing simple exercise clothing, and for the first time, Sarah Lynn saw him without layers of uniform or armor. The scars were extensive. They traced across his shoulders, down his arms, disappeared beneath his shirt. Each one told a story of something that should have killed him but didn't. He spotted her and stopped mid-form, reaching for a towel. "Your Highness, Commander Vale." She moved closer, her usual confidence deserting her entirely. "I came to apologize, formally, according to Kethran custom." Jackson's expression was carefully neutral. "That's not necessary." "It is." Sarah Lynn performed the traditional gesture, right hand over her heart, left extended palm up, a physical acknowledgement that she'd questioned honor that should have been recognized. "I spoke in ignorance and arrogance. I questioned your courage without understanding what courage looks like. I mocked strength I was too blind to see. By the old traditions, I acknowledge my error and request forgiveness." For a long moment, Jackson said nothing. Then he took her extended hand in both of his, the return gesture that accepted the apology. "You're forgiven, Your Highness. Honestly, you couldn't have known. I should have known better than to assume." She looked up at him, really looked at him. "I learned about New Providence Station, about what you did there, what it cost you and your unit. I'm sorry I didn't take the time to understand before I spoke." Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, and something that looked like pain. "You researched me. I needed to understand who I'd wronged." Sarah Lynn didn't let go of his hands. "Commander Jackson, why did you leave the military? After what you accomplished, you could have had any position you wanted." Jackson was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because I was tired of making decisions that got people killed. Even when they were the right decisions, even when there was no alternative. I held that line for 6 months, and every day I sent people to positions I knew might kill them. And they went because they trusted me, because they believed in what we were protecting." He met her eyes. 61 good soldiers died following my orders. I don't regret those orders. I'd give them again in the same situation. But I can't keep carrying that weight. So I chose something different, diplomacy, building instead of destroying. Sarah Lynn felt tears threatening, which was ridiculous. She was a princess of the Kethran Empire. She didn't cry. But something about his quiet pain, his refusal to hide from what he'd endured, cracked something open inside her. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "Most people aren't when you actually look at them." There was no accusation in his words, just gentle truth. They stood like that for a moment, hands still joined, before Sarah Lynn slowly withdrew. Could I stay, talk with you for a while? I'd like to know you. The real you, not the assumptions I made." Jackson studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he nodded. "I'd like that. But fair warning, I'm not nearly as interesting as my service record makes me seem. Mostly, I'm just a guy who misses coffee and human food and isn't great at small talk. I'm terrible at formal diplomacy and use humor to avoid genuine connection," Sarah Lynn countered. "So we'll both be slightly uncomfortable together." That got a smile from him, small but genuine. Sounds like the start of an interesting friendship. They talked for 3 hours, starting with surface things and gradually diving deeper. Sarah Lynn told him about growing up royal, about the constant pressure to perform, to be sharp and witty and entertaining, because actually being vulnerable felt too dangerous. About how exhausting it was to be Princess Sarah Lynn Keth all the time, never just Sarah Lynn. Jackson told her about his childhood on a colony world, about his grandmother who raised him after his parents died, about why he joined the military in the first place, because he'd believed in protecting people, in being strong enough to stand between danger and those who couldn't defend themselves. "That's what the armor means to you, isn't it?" Sarah Lynn realized. "It's not just equipment, it's a promise." "It's a reminder," Jackson corrected. "That strength is only worth something if you use it to protect rather than harm. That power without responsibility is just violence in a prettier package. We value strength very differently, my people and yours." "Not that differently." Jackson smiled. "You're strong, Sarah Lynn, smart, capable, fierce. You just hide it behind jokes and irreverence." "Because showing people the real version is terrifying," she admitted. "What if they don't like who I actually am?" "Then they're idiots," Jackson said simply. "And their opinion isn't worth having." Sarah Lynn laughed, surprised by how much she needed to hear that. They continued talking, the conversation flowing easily now, moving between serious and playful with a comfort she hadn't expected. She found herself studying his face, the scars that marked it, the eyes that had seen too much but remained kind, the way he smiled like someone who'd earned the right to find joy in small things. He was beautiful, she realized. Not in the sharp, elegant way Catherine males were beautiful, but in a way that felt more real. Solid, genuine, marked by experience but not broken by it. "I should go," she said finally, though she didn't want to. "I've taken enough of your time." "You're welcome to take more of it," Jackson said. "Any time you want. Consider it standing invitation." Sarah Lynn felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'll take you up on that, soon." She hesitated at the door. "Thank you, Jackson, for forgiving me, for talking with me, for being you." "Thank you for taking the time to actually see me," he replied. "That's rarer than you'd think." Over the following weeks, Sarah Lynn found herself spending more and more time at the Terran embassy. Always with an official excuse at first: diplomatic discussions, cultural exchange programs, trade negotiations. But the excuses became thinner, and eventually she stopped pretending she was there for anything other than to spend time with Jackson. They talked about everything: philosophy, history, combat tactics, favorite foods, childhood memories. He taught her about human military theory, and she taught him Catherine blade forms. He introduced her to the concept of coffee. "It's terrible," she declared after the first sip, then immediately took another, and she showed him how to properly wear ceremonial Catherine ear decorations. "These are ridiculously complicated," he complained, fumbling with the silver bands. "That's the point. It's a status display. The more complex your decorations, the more important you are. Or the more time you have to waste on your appearance." "Exactly," she laughed, reaching up to adjust the bands he'd managed to tangle. "Which is why I wear minimal decorations. Everyone knows I'm royal. I don't need to prove it with jewelry. They were standing very close, Sarah Lynn's fingers gentle on his ears, which she'd learned were surprisingly sensitive for humans. Jackson had gone very still, his breathing slightly elevated, watching her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "Sarah Lynn," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She lowered her hands, suddenly nervous. "What?" "I'm falling for you." The words came out simple, direct, honest. I probably shouldn't say it. The complications alone, diplomatic problems, cultural differences, the fact that you're a princess and I'm a military attaché. But I don't want to hide it. You deserve to know. Sarah Lynn felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Jackson, you don't have to say anything," he continued. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted to be honest about where I stand." "You beautiful idiot," Sarah Lynn said softly. "I've been falling for you since the day you walked away from my mockery with more grace and dignity than I deserved. I'm just terrified because I don't know how this works. I've never felt this way about anyone." Hope bloomed across Jackson's face. "Really? Really?" She took his hands in hers. "I respect you more than anyone I've ever known. You're kind and strong and thoughtful and brave in ways I'm still learning to understand. When I'm with you, I don't have to be Princess Sarah Lynn Keth. I can just be Sarah Lynn. And that's," her voice caught, "that's something I never thought I'd find." Jackson pulled her into his arms, and Sarah Lynn went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heart beat steady and sure beneath her cheek. His arms wrapped around her carefully, like he was holding something precious. "We're going to face complications," he murmured into her hair. "Your family, my superiors, probably half the diplomatic corps. I don't care." "Yes, you do. And so do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." Sarah Lynn pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Together, I like the sound of that." "Me too." Jackson smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Fair warning, though. I'm still going to wear the armor when duty calls." "Good," Sarah Lynn said firmly, "because now I understand what it means, and I think it's one of the most honorable things about you." He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, and Sarah Lynn kissed him back with all the certainty she'd been lacking. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "The human who refused to prove himself turned out to be worth more than all the warriors who couldn't stop displaying their strength," she whispered. "And the princess who hid behind wit turned out to be brave enough to admit when she was wrong," Jackson replied. "Seems like we both had things to learn." "We did," Sarah Lynn smiled, "and I'm looking forward to learning more together." Outside the embassy windows, Catherine Prime's sun set in brilliant cascades of blue and violet light. Inside, a human soldier who'd learned that strength meant protection, and a princess who'd learned that vulnerability was its own kind of courage stood together, holding onto something neither had expected to find. And somewhere in the embassy's equipment storage, Jackson's armor waited, not a shield against the world but a promise to it. A reminder that the strongest warriors are the ones who choose not to hurt, that true power comes from control, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away from a fight you don't need to win. Princess Sarah Lynn Keth understood that now, and she loved him all the more for teaching her.